Well, week 16 was a critical week in the NFL as a lot of teams officially stamped their place in the playoffs, and some teams finally fell by the wayside. It was an interesting week. Now I'm here to talk about it. Let's take a look back at the week that was week 16 of the 2014 NFL season. And we'll start off with some of the top stories. Of course, one of the top stories was going to be Johnny Manziel getting hurt in the Carolina Panthers game. He's going to miss week 17, and apparently he had a significant hamstring injury that will require a lengthy period of time to recover from. This got the whole social media and sports media world ablaze, and that definitely made it a top story for no other reason than that it involved Johnny Football. Another top story obviously has to be, to me, several teams clinching their playoff spots at the end of the day. That's what you play the game for. You play the game to get into the playoffs, to have a chance to go to the Super Bowl. And a lot of teams stamped their place officially in the playoffs this past weekend, whereas a couple of teams really screwed the pooch and screwed up golden opportunities and deserved to sit at home come January time. But who are some of the bigger winners and losers in week number 16? Well, let's start off with the winners. And first, I'm going to go to the Dallas Cowboys. This is a team that for years has struggled to win in December, hasn't made the playoffs in years, and has traditionally screwed up big golden opportunities and pissed them right down their legs. Well, this year's Dallas Cowboys team, maybe it's a thing of the numbers kind of evening themselves out, whatever the case might be. A Cowboys team that most people, myself included, thought was going to be very bad, and especially after the 49ers game, thought was even going to be worse, has really, really made a season of it. A lot of credit to go around there, yeah, even from Jerry Jones to his son Stephen Jones to Jason Garrett to Tony Romo to DeMarco Murray to Dez Bryant, that great offensive line, that defense that while hasn't been great has been good enough. The Dallas Cowboys have not only made the playoffs, they've won the NFC East, ensuring themselves a home playoff game, and they really made a statement on Sunday. I mean, they embarrassed the Indianapolis Colts. They dismantled the Indianapolis Colts. Tony Romo played incredibly well in a December game again, which is something we're not used to seeing. DeMarco Murray played tough and played effectively enough. Dez Bryant was a bit of a force. The defense for the Cowboys in particular played very well. I mean, they won 42-7 for crying out loud, and they're 3-0 in December. After so many years of watching the Cowboys completely fall apart off the hinges in December, they're winning games when they should be winning games for a change, and they deserve a lot of credit for doing just that. I got to look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, too, another team that I really didn't think was going to do much more other than tease people this year, be that typical Steelers team that beat some really good teams and lost to some really bad teams. And they've done that this year, but they found ways to win more games, and they found ways to be able to handle their business. They have one of the best offenses in the National Football League, and this is a Steelers team that in 10-5 has already clinched a spot in the playoffs. And in the process made it very, very hard for the Kansas City Chiefs to think about making the playoffs. You got to give a lot of credit to the Pittsburgh Steelers playing in one of the toughest divisions in pro football. The fact that they were technically the first team in that division to make the playoffs is a good statement for them. The Seattle Seahawks. Now you're talking about a team that in a lot of ways can control its own destiny after a few weeks ago looking shaky and looking questionable about whether or not they might even make the playoffs. Now they could potentially control their own destiny in terms of getting the number one overall seed in the NFC, getting a first round bye, and having home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And we know how this goes. Home field advantage throughout the playoffs for the Seahawks worked very well last year, and it's still a very, very tough place to go and win a game. Got to give the Seahawks a lot of credit as well for the last few weeks, really turning it on when they really needed to. And you could say this and that about the Cardinals, but the fact is the Seahawks went into Arizona and they stomped them. They embarrassed them. I don't care who was playing quarterback. It wouldn't have mattered. The Seahawks looked like the Seahawks of last year. Now, who would be another big winner? I got to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, I picked them to beat the Broncos on Monday night. I'm not even sure I was that confident in that pick. But they made Peyton Manning look really bad. Like really, really bad. This was a big game for the Bengals to win. It clinched them a spot in the playoffs for the fourth consecutive year, if you can believe that. And you got to give them a lot of credit. I mean, it was a primetime game. Something else the Bengals have struggled with under Marvin Lewis is winning primetime games. Dalton wasn't great, but he most certainly didn't play as poorly as Peyton Manning did on Monday night. You got to give a lot of credit to the Cincinnati Bengals, too. In terms of some of the losers this week, got to look at the Buffalo Bills. You sat there after you started off 2-2 and went with Kyle Wharton because you thought he had a better chance of making the playoffs with him. Well, you were 8-6. You're playing Oakland, and you find a way to lose to a Raiders team that was 2-12. You're eliminated from playoff consideration. So you ended up starting Kyle Orton for no real reason, and you lost to the Raiders when you had a matchup against the Patriots next week that could have potentially created an opportunity for you to make the playoffs. That makes the Bills big-time losers. The Eagles have got to be big-time losers too. A few weeks ago, this was a team that was 9-3. This was a team that looked like they were cruising towards a first-round bye, if not home field advantage throughout the playoffs potentially in the NFC. And now losing to the Washington Redskins of all teams, they're eliminated from the playoffs. It was a big turn of events in just a few weeks' time. The Eagles are going to be scratching their heads about what happened, what went wrong all off season. The New Orleans Saints, as bad as the NFC South was, the Saints were right in the mix of things. If they had won their last two games, they could have won the division. Well, instead, they found a way to lose a fifth straight game at home. The Superdome is supposed to be such a tough place to play for opposing teams. It's supposed to be such a great home field advantage for the Saints, and it's been anything but in 2014. Now you're talking about a Saints team that's 6-9, that is eliminated from the playoffs, and it's just another offseason where they're going to be searching for answers. And then I got to look at Joe Flacco too. The Ravens really needed that win over the Texans on Sunday. And not only did they not get that win, Flacco was terrible. Flacco was doo-doo. We can so often talk about how winning and losing in the NFL is a team game, and it's a team that wins, it's a team that loses, and far too often quarterbacks get too much blame when their team loses and too much credit when their team wins. That's true. But, man, it's very, very hard to look at how poorly Joe Flacco performed, especially in the first half of that game on Sunday, and not put a lion's share of the blame on his shoulders and on his back and at his feet. And even when he's talking about it after the game, talking about we. No, mostly it was you. You sucked. You absolutely sucked at a time where your team really needed you to play well. You laid an absolute fucking egg. Now, who were some of the stars from week number 16? I got to go with Ryan Tannehill. For all the talk out of that 2012 draft class about Andrew Luck and Russell Wilson, I think one of the better stories for 2014 has been the development and growth of Ryan Tannehill. Here's a guy that in that Minnesota game Sunday threw for 396 yards and 4 touchdowns, and I think has established that he is some type of answer for the Miami Dolphins, and he's the guy that they need to build around long term. His development in year number 3 has been great for me to see. Russell Wilson had a big-time game on Sunday night. Over 400 all-purpose yards between the air and on the ground. He had 2 touchdowns through the air, another one on the ground. Russell Wilson got it done, and got it done in a big way against one of the league's best defenses. That's an incredibly impressive performance at a time where his team needed it, whereas Joe Flacco laid an egg. Russell Wilson played one of his best games of the year, and as a result, the Seahawks are now the leaders in the NFC West and not only have a chance to win that division, but have a chance at the number 1 overall seed in the NFC playoffs. You got to look at Marshawn Lynch too. That run was everything. Was it as good as his beast mode run in the playoffs in the 2010 season against the Saints? Maybe not, but it was still an impressive run. Still an incredible run, and still the type of run that makes you say, can the Seahawks really afford to lose Marshawn Lynch after this season? He came up big when he wasn't feeling that well. Odell Beckham Jr., what more could be said about this guy? This was a guy I was very big on very early in the draft process before this last draft, if you remember. I was talking about him as a top 10 talent very early on before a lot of people did. And Odell Beckham has just come in after his hamstring injury and just wrecked shit up. 8 catches, 148 yards, 2 touchdowns. This guy has shown himself to be the best wide receiver in that 2014 class so far, which is an impressive feat in and of itself because that's a class that is loaded with talent. The Evans, the Benjamins, the Watkins, and the so-ons and so forth. So many great wide receiver talents in that draft, and Beckham right now clearly shines a cut above the rest. Just incredible. And then I've also give credit to the stars of the Dallas Cowboys defense. They played like stars this week. To be able to embarrass the Colts in the way that they did and shut them out for the majority of the game to the point where the only time the Colts scored was a garbage touchdown with Matt Hasselbeck in late in the game. You got to give a lot of credit to them. That defense really stepped up at a time where they really needed it. So that's the week that was, week 16 of the 2014 NFL season. Most of the playoff teams have been decided with, I think, still one open slot in the AFC, but a lot of seeding positions are still yet to be determined. So week 17 should be interesting as well.